For 35 years, Pastor Paul Mitchell stood behind the polished oak pulpit of the Grace Community Church, holding a leather-bound Bible in his trembling hands. He was a good man. He was a faithful shepherd. Every Sunday, he looked out at the sea of 500 faces etched with worry, with debt, with the quiet desperation of modern life, and he gave them the only promise he had left. Hold on. He is coming soon. The King is returning on the clouds to wipe away every tear. Paul preached the second coming with the fire of a prophet. He painted pictures of trumpets sounding, of the sky rolling back like a scroll, of a divine rescue operation that would save the faithful from a broken world. But in the silence of the rectory, long after the lights were turned off and the congregation had gone home to their struggles, Paul stared at the ceiling with a hollow ache in his chest. He was selling a ticket to a train that never seemed to arrive. He felt like a travel agent for a destination he had never visited. He felt ... empty. The God he preached about felt distant. A cosmic landlord who lived in a gated community called heaven, reachable only through the erratic reception of prayer. This spiritual exhaustion turned into a full-blown crisis 3 months ago in a sterile room at St. Mary's Hospital. Paul's wife, Martha, the woman who had played the piano for the choir for 30 years, the woman who prayed more than any nun, died. But she didn't die with the peace that surpasses all understanding that Paul had promised in his sermons. She died terrified. She gripped Paul's hand until her knuckles turned white, her eyes wide with a primal panic, whispering, "Did I do enough, Paul? Did I pray enough? What if he doesn't know me?" Paul watched the love of his life die in fear of judgment, despite a lifetime of devotion. That moment broke him. It shattered the foundation of his theology. He realized with a sickening clarity that the religion he had taught, a religion based on future salvation and present unworthiness, had failed her. It offered no comfort in the final moment, only a terrifying audit of the soul. Since that night, Paul went through the motions, but his faith was ash. On a rainy Tuesday night in November, the answer finally came. But it didn't come from a burning bush, and it didn't come from an angel in white robes. It came in the church parking lot. Paul was walking to his old Ford truck, fumbling for his keys, his mind replaying Martha's final, fearful question. The rain was cold. The streetlights flickered. And then he saw it. Standing next to his truck was a figure. It was tall, too tall to be human, with a silhouette that seemed to absorb the ambient light rather than reflect it. It had no face that Paul could recognize, just large dark eyes that shimmered with a pale violet luminescence. Paul's instinct, honed by 3 decades of spiritual warfare, theology, kicked in. The hair on his arms stood up. He dropped his keys. He gripped his Bible like a weapon. "I bind you," Paul shouted, his voice cracking in the wet air. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave. You are a demon. You have no power here." He expected the creature to recoil. He expected it to hiss or vanish into smoke. But the figure did not move. It did not flinch. It simply watched him with a calmness that felt older than the stones of the church. Then the voice entered Paul's mind. It wasn't a sound. It was a frequency. It felt like a warm liquid pouring into the cracks of his shattered heart, bypassing his auditory nerves and speaking directly to his consciousness. "I am not a demon, Paul Mitchell," the alien projected, "and I am not here to hurt you. I have come to answer the question you ask the ceiling every night." Paul froze. The fear began to dissolve, replaced by a bewildering sense of recognition. You ask where he is, the entity continued. You preach that he is coming. You look at the clouds. You look at the wars in the Middle East. You look for signs. But you are looking in the wrong direction. The observer stepped closer, its presence radiating a profound, unshakable peace. The deception has lasted for 2,000 years, Paul. The church told you to wait for a king to arrive from the sky. They told you to be small. They told you to be unworthy. They hid the map. The truth, the entity revealed, is that Jesus is already back. He never left. The second coming is not an invasion from the stars, Paul. It is an eruption from within the soil of the human soul. It is happening right now, not on the news, but in the silence of the awakened heart. This video is the story of that night. It is the story of how a broken pastor learnt the secret that transforms religion into reality. If you are tired of waiting for a savior to fix your life, if you are exhausted by a faith that demands you feel small, and if you are ready to understand the physics of the Christ consciousness that is dormant in your own DNA, then subscribe. The sermon is over. The awakening has begun. Paul Mitchell lowered his arm, the Bible slipping from his grip and hitting a puddle with a wet thud. The command to bind the entity had failed. The spiritual formulas he had memorized in seminary, the verses he had wielded like swords for 35 years, had evaporated in the face of this silent, violet-eyed observer. He leaned against the cold metal of his truck, his breath coming in ragged gasps, not from exertion, but from the sudden, terrifying collapse of his reality. He looked at the alien, and for the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw a mirror. The entity wasn't attacking him. It was simply waiting, holding a space so profound that Paul's own internal noise became deafening. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to understand the secret life of Pastor Paul. To his congregation, he was the rock. He was the man with the answers. When a child died, they came to Paul. When a marriage failed, they came to Paul. He offered them scriptures about God's plan, about the mystery of faith, about the comfort of the Holy Spirit. But inside, Paul was a man shouting into a void. For the last decade, his prayers had felt like letters sent to an address that no longer existed. He would sit in his study, staring at the spine of his theology books, feeling a crushing distance between him and the divine. He preached a God who was Father, but he felt a God who was a CEO, distant, demanding, and mostly silent. He had built a career on the architecture of certainty, but his soul was living in a slum of doubt. He felt like a fraud. He felt that if his congregation knew how empty his own spiritual tank was, they would run him out of town. But the emptiness was manageable until Martha died. The alien moved a step closer, not encroaching on Paul's space, but intensifying its focus. I see the memory you carry, the entity projected, its mental voice soft as smoke. I see the room. I see the machines. I see the fear in her eyes. You are still standing by her bed, Paul. Paul squeezed his eyes shut, but the image was burned into his retina. It was the night that destroyed him. Martha, his wife of 40 years, the woman who had organized the charity drives, who had memorized the Psalms, who had never missed a Sunday. She was dying of congestive heart failure. The doctors had turned off the monitors. It was supposed to be peaceful. It was supposed to be a homecoming. Paul had held her hand, ready to whisper the final benediction, expecting her to smile, to see the angels, to drift away into the arms of Jesus instead. Martha had panicked. It wasn't physical pain. It was spiritual terror. Her eyes had snapped open, wide and dilated, scanning the corners of the room as if she saw demons waiting in the shadows. She had gripped Paul's arm with a strength that left bruises. "Paul," she had rasped, her voice trembling with a horror he would never forget. "The judgment. The books. What if I missed something? What if I'm not in the book of life? I'm afraid, Paul. It's so dark. Why is it so dark? Why isn't he here?" Paul had tried to comfort her. He had quoted John 3:16. He had recited the promises. But his words bounced off her terror like pebbles off a tank. Martha, the saint of Grace Community Church, died, screaming internally, terrified that an angry God was waiting to audit her soul. She died not like a daughter going home, but like a defendant going to court. That moment broke Paul's theology into dust. He stood over her body, looking at her frozen face, and a terrible, blasphemous thought took root in his mind. If she wasn't safe, then no one is. If a lifetime of service doesn't buy you peace at the end, then the system is a lie. He realized that the God he had preached, the God of judgment, the God of the checklist, the God who needed to be appeased, had traumatized his wife. He had taught her to fear the master so deeply that she couldn't recognize the father. "You blame yourself." The alien's voice cut through the memory, sharp and precise. "You think you failed her. But you did not fail her, Paul. The program failed her." Paul looked up, rain dripping from his nose. "I taught her," he whispered, his voice broken. "I taught her to fear hell. I taught her that we are filthy rags. I taught her that salvation is a narrow gate. I made her afraid, and when she died, that fear was the only thing she had left. You taught her separation, the entity corrected, and separation is the frequency of hell." The observer gestured to the dark, rainy parking lot. "Look around you. You see darkness. You feel cold. This is how you perceive the universe, because you have been trained to believe that God is up there and you are down here. You have been trained to believe that there is a gap between the Creator and the created, a gap that can only be bridged by blood, by sacrifice, by pleading. This belief," the entity explained, "is not just a thought. It is a frequency. When you believe you are separate from God, you vibrate at the frequency of lack. When you believe you are unworthy, you vibrate at the frequency of guilt. And when you believe you are being judged, you vibrate at the frequency of fear." Martha did not die in the presence of demons, the alien revealed. She died in the presence of her own frequency. She spent 40 years practicing the vibration of "I am not good enough." She spent 40 years waiting for a future salvation while denying the present connection. And when she stepped out of her body, that vibration manifested as her reality. She created her own darkness, Paul, and you helped her build it. The words hit Paul like a physical blow to the stomach. He doubled over, retching dryly. It was the truth. He knew it was the truth. He had spent his life preaching a gospel of inadequacy. He had told people they were broken sinners who needed to beg for scraps from the king's table. He had weaponized fear to keep the pews full. He told them to fear the fire so they would tithe, to fear the judgment so they would obey. He thought he was saving them, but he was just installing a virus that ate their peace. "I didn't know," Paul sobbed, the tears mixing with the rain. I thought that was the way. The Bible says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." The Bible was written by men, the alien said, and then rewritten by emperors who needed obedient subjects. Fear is not the beginning of wisdom, Paul. Fear is the beginning of control. A fearful population is easy to rule. A fearful soul is easy to manipulate. If you tell a man he has the power of God inside him, he needs no temple and no priest. But if you tell him he is a worm who will burn forever without your help, he will give you his life. You are suffering, the entity continued, its tone softening into compassion, because you are vibrating at the same frequency Martha did. You feel God is distant because you are distant. You have tuned your radio to the station of fear. And you are surprised that you cannot hear the music of love. God has not moved. Paul, you have simply built a wall of static. Paul looked at the Bible lying in the puddle. It looked just like a book. Wet paper, leather, ink. It didn't look magic anymore. It looked heavy, so it's all a lie. Paul asked, his voice trembling. Jesus, the cross, the salvation, it's all just a trick. No, the alien said firmly. The story is real, but the interpretation has been inverted. You have been reading the map upside down. Jesus did not come to start a religion of fear. He did not come to tell you how bad you are. He came to show you what you are. The alien extended a long, slender finger, pointing directly at Paul's chest, right over his beating heart. He did not come to save you from God. He came to save you from the illusion that you were ever separate from God. And tonight, Paul Mitchell, we are going to correct the record. We are going to turn the radio dial. But first, you must let go of the guilt. You must let go of Martha. You cannot help her by dying with her. You can only help her by waking up. Paul took a deep breath. The air felt charged, electric. The despair that had choked him for months was shifting, cracking under the weight of this new, terrifying, liberating perspective. He wasn't a bad shepherd. He was just a shepherd who had been given a broken compass. Show me, Paul whispered. If he isn't in the sky, ... Show me where he is. Open your mind, the alien commanded, and prepare to see the universe not as a courtroom, but as a symphony. The alien did not wait for Paul's permission. It simply raised a slender, grey hand and touched the center of the pastor's forehead. Instantly, the parking lot, the rain, the truck, and the heavy leather Bible vanished. Paul Mitchell was no longer a 63-year-old man with bad knees and a broken heart. He was a point of consciousness floating in the obsidian void. But it wasn't dark. It was blindingly alive. Paul saw galaxies spinning like pinwheels of diamond dust. He saw nebulae birthing stars in clouds of violet and gold. He saw the infinite, mathematical perfection of a universe so vast that the human mind would normally shatter trying to comprehend it. Look, Paul, the observer's voice resonated, not from beside him, but from everywhere. Look at the kingdom. Paul wept. He didn't have eyes, but he wept. For 35 years, he had preached about a God who seemed obsessed with the petty rules of one species on one tiny rock. He had preached a God who was angry about mixed fabrics and dietary restrictions. But looking at this endless, breathing tapestry of creation, he realized how offensively small his theology had been. The creator of this magnitude didn't need Paul's defense. The creator of this magnitude wasn't sitting on a cloud checking attendance lists. You doubted, the entity said. You felt God was distant. He is not distant, Paul. He is infinite. You were trying to fit the ocean into a teacup, and you were angry that the cup overflowed. Your doubt was not a sin. It was a symptom of a world view that was too small for your soul. The vision zoomed in, rushing past clusters of galaxies, diving into the Milky Way, and finally hovering over a small, blue marble, Earth. It looked fragile. It looked feverish. It was pulsing with a muddy, grey aura. "This is your home," the observer explained. "It is a beautiful planet, but it is a hide-and-city zone for eons. The consciousness of this world has been trapped in a feedback loop of fear, survival, and separation. It is a heavy gravity well. Souls come here and they forget who they are. They get lost in the illusion of the flesh. But 2,000 of your years ago, the entity continued. A decision was made. The frequency of the planet had dropped dangerously low. The darkness was choking the light. An intervention was required. Not a military intervention. A frequency injection. The vision focused on a specific point in the Middle East. A bright, blindingly white spark descended from the cosmos and entered the timeline. "Let us talk about the man you call Jesus," the observer said. "You call him the Son of God. You worship him. You build statues of him. But you do not understand what he was. He was not a victim sent to be slaughtered by an angry father," the entity declared, correcting the cornerstone of Paul's theology. "He was a volunteer. He was an advanced consciousness, a star, seed of the highest order who voluntarily chose to compress his infinite energy into a dense biological container. Imagine a diver." The alien used an analogy Paul could grasp. "Imagine a master diver who sees people drowning at the bottom of a dark, cold ocean. The people are panicking. They think the ocean is all there is. The diver does not stay on the boat and shout instructions. He puts on the heavy suit. He dives into the crushing pressure. He goes down into the dark to show them the way back to the surface." Jesus was the diver. He lowered his frequency just enough to take human form. But he kept his connection to the surface, to the source wide open. He walked among you not to judge you, but to be a prototype. He came to show the species what a human being looks like when they are fully plugged into the divine voltage. Paul watched the spark of light moving across the map of ancient Judea. It didn't look like a religious figure. It looked like a tuning fork vibrating in a room full of dull metal. "You call his works miracles," the observer said. "You think they were magic tricks proving his divinity. This is childish thinking. They were not magic. They were technology. They were the application of high-frequency physics." The vision shifted. Paul saw Jesus standing before a leper. The leper's body was decaying, vibrating with the chaotic, jagged frequency of disease. "Look at the energy," the entity commanded. Paul saw the energy field of Jesus. It was a coherent, blindingly fast oscillation of pure white light. It was the frequency of absolute love. When Jesus touched the leper, he didn't beg God to heal the man. He simply imposed his own frequency onto the man's chaotic field. "Entrainment," the alien explained. "It is a law of physics. When a strong vibration meets a weak vibration, the weak one must synchronize with the strong one." Jesus was vibrating at the frequency of perfect health. The leper was vibrating at the frequency of sickness. When they connected, the sickness could not exist in the presence of that much light. It was burned away. The cells reorganized instantly to match the higher pattern. "He walked on water," the entity continued, "not because he broke the laws of physics, but because he mastered density. He raised the vibration of his body until it was lighter than the liquid. He turned water into wine not by magic, but by rearranging the atomic structure using focused intention. He was showing you the potential of the human instrument. He told you this, the alien reminded Paul. He said, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." Did you preach that verse, Paul? Or did you skip it? Paul felt a pang of shame. He had skipped it, or he had explained it away as a metaphor. He had taught his flock that miracles ended with the apostles. He had taught them that they were powerless. "I taught them to wait for him to do it," Paul whispered. "I didn't know we were supposed to do it." That was the tragedy, the observer said. He came to activate you, but instead of activating, you deified him. You put him on a pedestal so high that you didn't have to emulate him. You worshipped the messenger and ignored the message. The vision shifted again. It moved to the cross. But this time, Paul didn't see the blood and the gore. He saw the energy. He saw the massive, dark cloud of human hatred, fear, and mockery attacking the single point of white light. The crucifixion was the ultimate test of frequency. The entity revealed. The world threw its lowest vibration at him. Hate, betrayal, torture, death. The goal of the darkness was to make him lower his frequency. They wanted him to hate them back. If he had cursed them from the cross, the darkness would have won. He would have become just another man trapped in the cycle of violence. But he did not, the observer said with reverence. He held the note. Even as they killed his body, he maintained the frequency of unconditional love. "Father, forgive them." In that moment, he broke the matrix. He proved that the spirit is stronger than the world. And then, the resurrection, the vision exploded into gold. Paul saw the tomb, but he didn't see a body coming back to life in the traditional sense. He saw a transmutation. He saw the biological matter of the body being accelerated so fast that it turned into pure light energy. He did not come back to life, the alien corrected. He evolved. He shifted his consciousness into a state where death is impossible. He became a light body. He didn't go up to heaven, Paul. Heaven is not a place with GPS coordinates. He expanded. He became a field of consciousness that wraps around the entire planet. "This is the secret you must understand," the entity said, bringing Paul back to the feeling of the rain in the parking lot. Though the vision remained, he did not leave. He simply changed the channel. He is not gone. He is here. He is in the air you breathe. He is in the space between your atoms. He is the broadcast signal that has been playing for 2,000 years, waiting for someone to build a receiver. "And this brings us to the second coming," the alien said, looking deep into Paul's soul. "You are looking for a man to fall from the sky, but that is not how it happens. The seed does not return as a seed. It returns as a harvest. The second coming," the observer projected into Paul's mind, "is not an invasion. It is an emergence." The vision changed. Paul was no longer looking at the single bright spark of Jesus in ancient Judea. He was looking at the modern earth. It was covered in darkness, but dotted across the surface were millions of tiny, flickering lights. They looked like embers in a dying fire. "You have been looking at the sky for 2,000 years, Paul," the entity said. "You have been waiting for the clouds to part and for a king to descend on a white horse to slaughter your enemies and take you home. This is a fantasy born of a childish desire for a superhero. It absolves you of all work. It allows you to sit in the pew and wait. But the plan was never for the master to return and do the homework for the students. The plan was for the students to become masters." The entity gestured to the millions of tiny lights on the earth. Jesus was the seed. He planted himself in the soil of human consciousness. He died and dissolved so that his genetic code, the code of unconditional love and divine power, could be distributed into the entire species. He did not leave you to leave you alone. He left you so he could multiply. The second coming is not the return of the man Jesus. It is the rising of the Christ consciousness within you. Paul watched as one of the tiny lights on the map flared up, becoming as bright as the original spark. Then another, then 1,000 more. "This is what is happening right now," the observer whispered. "It is quiet. It is not on your news channels, but all over your planet, souls are waking up. They are realizing that the kingdom is not a place you go to when you die. It is a frequency you inhabit while you live. When a mother forgives the man who killed her son, that is the second coming. When a stranger gives his last dollar to a beggar, that is the second coming. When you choose peace instead of revenge, that is the second coming. Jesus returns every time you match his frequency," the entity declared. "Every time you act with absolute compassion, you become a portal. For that moment, his spirit walks the earth again through your hands, through your eyes, through your voice. He does not need a new body, Paul. He has 8 billion potential bodies. He is waiting for you to let him in." Paul felt a shiver run through his soul. This idea was terrifyingly beautiful. It meant that he wasn't waiting for a savior. He was supposed to be the vessel for the savior. It meant the responsibility was his. "But we are broken," Paul argued weakly. "We can't do what he did. We are sinners." "You are sleeping gods," the alien corrected, "and you are waking up." This brings us to the critical mass. The vision of the earth showed the lights connecting. Lines of golden energy formed a web around the planet. "There is a physics to this awakening," the observer explained. "The earth is a conscious system, right now. The dominant frequency is fear. But if a certain number of Mensa, critical mass, can achieve and hold the Christ's frequency, the entire planetary grid will shift. You do not need everyone to wake up. You only need the square root of 1% of the population to fully embody unconditional love. When that threshold is crossed, the resonance will be too strong for the darkness to withstand. The old structures of war, greed, and control will crumble not because a God destroyed them, but because the collective consciousness of humanity no longer supports their existence. "This is the rapture you preach about," the entity said, reinterpreting the prophecy. "It is not people flying up into the sky. It is the vibration of the planet rising so high that the lower frequencies fall away. The wicked are not punished. They simply cannot exist in the new atmosphere. They are incompatible with the new reality." The vision faded, and Paul found himself standing back in the wet parking lot. The rain was still falling, but it felt different now. It felt like a baptism. The alien stood before him, its violet eyes glowing softly. "You have spent 35 years telling people to wait for the bus," the entity said. "And all the while, you had the keys to the car in your pocket. Martha died waiting. Paul, do not let your congregation die waiting. Stop preaching the waiting. Start preaching the becoming." Paul looked at his hands. He felt a tingling sensation in his palms. He realized that the emptiness he had felt for so long wasn't the absence of God. It was the unused potential of his own soul screaming to be used. "But why?" Paul asked, a surge of anger mixing with his awe. "If this is the truth, if we have this power, why didn't the church tell us? Why have we been sitting in the dark for 2,000 years? The alien's expression didn't change, but the atmosphere around them grew heavy. The peace was replaced by a cold, sharp gravity, because, the entity said, a population that knows it is divine cannot be controlled. A population that realizes the kingdom is within them does not need a king above them. You asked why the secret was hidden. Now, we must look at the thieves. We must look at how the message was stolen, inverted, and sold back to you as a cage. Paul Mitchell stood in the rain, clutching the hood of his truck. The awe of the cosmic vision was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. He had spent his life believing that he was a servant of the truth. Now, the entity standing before him was suggesting that he had been an unwitting agent of a 2,000-year-old cover-up. They stole it. Paul asked, his voice raw. Who? The church? The fathers? Why would they hide the very thing that could save the world? Because a saved world does not need a savior, the observer replied, its mental voice cutting like a scalpel. And a healed man does not need a physician. To understand the theft, Paul, you must look at the crime scene. You must look at the cross. The entity projected a holographic image of a stained glass window, the kind Paul had in his own church. It depicted Jesus bleeding on the cross, while God the Father looked down from a cloud, stern and satisfied. Tell me the story you preach, the alien commanded. Why did he die? He died for our sins. Paul recited the catechism automatically. He died to pay the penalty. We were guilty. God is holy. Justice demanded blood. Jesus took our place to appease the wrath of the Father. Stop, the entity interrupted. Listen to what you are saying. You are describing a God who is so petty, so bound by bureaucratic rules of justice, that he required the torture and murder of his own innocent son before he could find it in his heart to forgive you. Does that sound like infinite love to you, Paul? Or does it sound like a pagan volcano god demanding a virgin sacrifice? Paul fell silent. He had taught this doctrine penal substitutionary atonement for decades. But hearing it described that way, it sounded monstrous. This is the first distortion, the observer declared. The idea that the cross was a transaction, a payment, a debt settlement. This is a lie invented by men who understood law, courts, not love. God did not demand the death of Jesus. Humanity did. Jesus was not killed to pay for your sins. He was killed because he was a threat to the system. The hologram changed. It showed Jesus not on the cross, but in the temple, overturning the tables of the money changers. It showed him eating with lepers. It showed him talking to women. Look at him, the alien said. He was a spiritual anarchist. He told the people they didn't need the temple to find God. He told them the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He told them that the outcasts, the prostitutes, the tax collectors were closer to the kingdom than the high priests. He was democratizing the divine. He was handing out the keys to the kingdom to everyone, for free. Do you understand how dangerous that is to a religious hierarchy? The entity asked, if the people realize that God is inside them, ... if they realize they can heal themselves, if they realize they are beloved without paying a tithe or slaughtering a goat, then the temple goes out of business. The priesthood becomes obsolete. They killed him not to fulfill a prophecy, but to silence a revolution. They killed him to get their monopoly back. But here is the brilliance of the deception, the observer continued, its tone darkening. They realized they couldn't stop the movement. His energy was too strong. So, instead of fighting it, they hijacked it. Within 300 years, the empire that executed him adopted his name. Rome realized that a religion of turn the other cheek was useful for keeping subjects compliant. But they couldn't keep his original message. The message of the Argods was too empowering, so they inverted it. This brings us to the second distortion, the doctrine of original sin. Jesus taught original blessing. He picked up children and said, "To such as these belongs the kingdom." He saw the light in everyone. But the church needed you to feel broken. So they invented a disease that only they could cure. They told you that you were born wrong, the alien explained. They told you that your very nature was corrupt, filthy, and separated from God from the moment of your first breath. They traumatized the infant soul before it could even speak. Why? Because if you were born sick, you need the medicine. And who holds the patent on the medicine? The church. They created the ultimate supply and demand economy, the entity said with clinical detachment. They manufactured the demand sin, and they monopolized the supply grace. They positioned themselves as the middleman between you and the source. You could not go to God directly. You had to go through the priest, the confession, the sacrament. This is the trap of dependence. Paul, they took a message of radical self-empowerment and turned it into a system of absolute codependence. They clipped the wings of the eagle and then sold it a ladder. Paul leaned his head back against the truck window. He felt sick. He thought about the thousands of altar calls he had led. He thought about how he had told weeping teenagers that they were wretches saved by grace. He thought he was being humble. He didn't realize he was being abusive. "We thought we were glorifying God," Paul whispered. "By making ourselves small, we thought we were making him big." "You cannot glorify the artist by spitting on his masterpiece," the observer countered. "You are the masterpiece. When you call yourself a wretch, you are insulting the one who made you. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is understanding your true scale in the cosmos." But the control did not stop at sin, the entity added. To keep the people in line, they needed a bigger stick. They needed a prison. And so, they weaponized the afterlife. They invented hell. Paul's eyes snapped open. No, hell is real. Jesus spoke of Gehenna. He spoke of the weeping and gnashing of teeth. He spoke of a garbage dump outside Jerusalem where they burned trash. The alien corrected. He used it as a metaphor for the state of a soul consumed by its own negativity. He was speaking of a state of consciousness, Paul, not a torture chamber constructed by a loving father. Think about the logic, the entity pressed. You teach that God is love, unconditional love. Yet you also teach that if a human being makes mistakes for 70 years, usually due to trauma, ignorance, or pain, this loving God will burn them alive for eternity. Trillions of years of torture for a finite crime. This is not justice. This is sadism. Even a human father would not burn his child. Is God less moral than you? Hell was invented as a political tool, the observer stated flatly. It is the ultimate threat. Obey us, pay us, submit to us, or burn forever. It works. It worked on Martha. It kept her in the pew for 40 years. But it also kept her from ever loving God. You cannot love someone who holds a gun to your head. You can only obey them. This is the tragedy of your religion, Paul. It produced billions of obedient slaves, but very few awakened sons and daughters. It produced fear, not fruit. Paul looked at the church building across the parking lot. The stained glass window of the Good Shepherd was dark now. For the first time, The building didn't look like a sanctuary. It looked like a fortress built to keep the people in and the truth out. So what is the truth? Paul asked, his voice shaking with the rage of a man who realizes he has been robbed. If there is no hell, if there is no payment, what is there? There is consequence, the entity said. There is cause and effect. There is the law of vibration. You create your own reality, Paul. If you live in hatred, you create a hellish experience for yourself in this life and the next. If you live in love, you create a heavenly experience. You are the judge. You are the jury. You are the architect. And this brings us to the trap of the future, the alien said. The final way they keep you asleep is by making you wait for a tomorrow that never comes. The trap of the future, the observer continued, pacing slowly around the bewildered pastor. This is the most subtle and effective cage they built. They taught you that the kingdom of heaven is a destination. They taught you that the second coming is an event. They placed all the power, all the glory, and all the peace in a time that is not yet. Think about what this does to your frequency. Paul, when you are waiting for something, you are affirming that you do not have it. When you pray thy kingdom come, you are stating that the kingdom is absent. You are vibrating at the frequency of lack. You are telling the universe, I am empty. I am waiting. And because the universe is a mirror, it reflects that waiting back to you. It gives you more waiting. It gives you more absence. Paul's mind raced back to his thousands of sermons on prophecy. The rapture, the tribulation, the millennium. He had spent his life drawing timelines on whiteboards, trying to calculate when God would finally show up. But Jesus said he would return, Paul argued, his voice losing its certainty. He told us to watch. He told you the kingdom is at hand, the alien corrected. He told you the kingdom is within you. He was speaking of the eternal, now. But the church couldn't sell the now. If you realize you were saved right now, if you realize God is here right now, you stop needing the church. So they pushed the promise into the future. They made it a retirement plan. Suffer now, obey now, pay now, and you will get your reward after you die. It is the ultimate scam. Paul, they sold you insurance for a house you are not allowed to visit until you are dead. This brings us to the physics of prayer, the entity said, stopping directly in front of Paul. I have listened to your prayers. Paul, I have heard the prayers of your world. They are a cacophony of begging. Please give me. Please help me. Please save me. You think this is piety. It is not. It is poverty consciousness. When you beg, you are confirming your separation. You are acting like a beggar outside the palace gates. But you are not a beggar. You are the prince who has forgotten he holds the key to the pantry. True prayer, the observer explained, is not a request. It is an alignment. It is not asking for what you lack. It is tuning your frequency to what is already available. Jesus did not beg God to heal the sick. He thanked God that the healing was already done. Father, I thank you that you have heard me. He operated from the frequency of gratitude, which is the frequency of abundance. You operate from the frequency of desperation, which is the frequency of resistance. Paul looked at the dark sky. He realized why his prayers had felt like they were hitting the ceiling. He had been praying at God, not with God. He had been broadcasting static. So the judgment, Paul whispered, the old fear surfacing one last time. Martha's fear of the throne. That was all a lie. There is a judgment, the entity said gravely, but it is not what you think. There is no old man with a beard sitting on a white throne checking a ledger. That is a fairy tale. The judgment is the life review. The entity projected a new imager kaleidoscope of memories, feelings, and moments flashing by in an instant. When you shed your physical body, the observer explained, your consciousness expands. You see your entire life in a single flash, but you don't just see it. You feel it. You feel every moment of love you gave, and you feel every moment of pain you caused. You feel the ripple effect of your existence. If you judged someone harshly, you feel their shame. If you ignored a beggar, you feel his hunger. If you loved a child, you feel their joy. You judge yourself, Paul. You are the only one in the room. The pain of the life review is not punishment inflicted by God. It is the pain of your own clarity. It is the burning realization of how many times you chose fear over love. Martha is not being tortured by demons, the entity said softly. She is reviewing her life, and her greatest pain right now is seeing how much time she wasted being afraid of a God who only wanted to hold her. She is grieving her own blindness. That is the fire of purification. Paul let out a long, shuddering breath. The image of the life review felt right. It felt just. It wasn't arbitrary cruelty. It was absolute accountability. And what about the others? Paul asked, looking out at the city lights beyond the church. I've taught that Jesus is the only way. I've taught that the Buddhists, the Muslims, the atheists, they are all lost. Was that a lie too? The alien looked at him with a gaze that seemed to hold the compassion of 1,000 saints. The Christ's consciousness, the entity said, is not a brand name. It is not a trademark of Christianity. It is a frequency. It is the frequency of unconditional love and unity with the source. Water is water, Paul, whether you call it aqua, O, or ma. The label on the bottle does not change the liquid inside. Jesus was a pure vessel of this frequency, yes, but so was Buddha. So were many others who walked the path of light. God does not listen to the label you wear. God listens to the signal you broadcast. A Muslim who vibrates at the frequency of compassion is closer to the kingdom than a Christian who vibrates at the frequency of judgment. A loving atheist is more saved than a hateful bishop. The trap of religion is that it convinces you that label matters more than the content. It convinces you to kill each other over the name of the container, while spilling the water on the ground. We observers do not see Christians or Jews or Muslims, the entity revealed. We see lights. Some are bright, some are dim. We see the frequency. And right now, the frequency of your religious institutions is very dim. They are heavy with judgment. They are heavy with history. They are blocking the light. The alien stepped back, the violet light in its eyes pulsing with a finality. The lesson was complete. The theology was dismantled. The age of religion is ending, Paul, the observer, declared. The age of spirituality is beginning. The age of the middleman is over. The curtain in the temple was torn 2,000 years ago, but you have spent all this time trying to sew it back together. Stop sewing. Walk through the curtain. The Holy of Holies is empty of idols, but it is full of mirrors. Go look in the mirror, Paul, and meet the Christ who has been waiting for you to stop looking at the sky. The entity began to fade, its form dissolving into the rain, returning to the frequency from which it came. I leave you with a mission. The final thought echoed in Paul's mind. Do not just believe in Jesus. That is easy. Even the demons believe. Be Jesus. Be the frequency. That is the only second coming that matters. The parking lot was empty. The rain had stopped. Paul Mitchell stood alone under the street. He looked at his church, the brick-and-mortar structure he had served for 35 years. It looked small now. It looked like a cocoon that had served its purpose. He picked up his Bible from the puddle. He wiped the mud off the cover. He didn't throw it away, but he knew he would never read it the same way again. It wasn't a rule book anymore. It was a diary of humanity's struggle to wake up. Paul walked to his truck, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat. He didn't start the engine immediately. He closed his eyes. He didn't bow his head. He didn't fold his hands. He simply breathed. He breathed in the silence. He felt the beat of his own heart. He felt the connection to the stars above him and the earth beneath him. He felt the presence of Martha not as a memory of fear, but as a presence of love, finally free from the story he had told her. "Thank you," Paul whispered. Not a plea, a statement. He turned the key. The truck roared to life. He had a sermon to write for Sunday, but it wouldn't be about the end times. It would be about the beginning. Paul Mitchell sat in his study on Saturday night. The blank page of his sermon notes lay on the desk in front of him. For 35 years, Saturday nights had been a ritual of anxiety, frantically searching for scriptures, cross-referencing commentaries, trying to build a fortress of words to protect his flock from the devil. Tonight, the desk was empty of books. There was no concordance, no Greek dictionary, just Paul, the silence, and a framed photograph of Martha. He picked up the photo. For 3 months, looking at her face had filled him with a corrosive acid of guilt. He had seen the terror in her dying eyes and felt it was his fault. But tonight, he looked at her and saw something else. He saw the woman who had loved him. He saw the journey they had shared. "I'm sorry, Martha," Paul whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry I taught you to be afraid. But I'm going to fix it. I can't change your death, but I can change your legacy." He realized that the only way to honor her was not to drown in regret, but to become the man she had always needed him to be, a man who wasn't afraid of God. He closed his eyes and practiced the frequency, formula the observer had shown him. Step 1, the shift to gratitude. Instead of begging God for forgiveness, Paul took a deep breath. "Thank you," he thought. "Thank you for the 40 years I had with her. Thank you for the pain that woke me up. Thank you for this new chance." He felt the shift instantly. The heavy pressure in his chest lightened. He was no longer a debtor begging for time. He was a beneficiary acknowledging a gift. Step 2, conscious choice. He felt a flicker of anxiety about tomorrow's service. What will the deacons say? What if they fire me? He caught the thought. It was the frequency of fear. He observed it, neutralized it, and chose again. "I choose truth," he declared internally. "I choose to be a channel, regardless of the cost." Step 3, vulnerability. He looked at his robe hanging on the door, the heavy, embroidered vestment he wore every Sunday. It was a costume. It was a symbol of authority meant to separate him from the congregation. He stood up, walked to the door, and took the robe off the hook. He folded it and put it in the closet. Tomorrow, he would wear a suit. Tomorrow, he would be just a man. Sunday morning at Grace Community Church. The pews were full. 500 people sat in their usual spots, waiting for the usual routine. 3 hymns, an offering, and a 40-minute sermon on the signs of the times. They were comfortable in their routine. They were asleep. Paul walked onto the platform. He wasn't wearing his robe. He wasn't carrying his massive Bible. He walked to the pulpit, looked at the microphone, and then he stepped away from it. He walked down the stairs of the stage and stood on the floor. On the same level as the people, a ripple of confusion went through the room. The organist hesitated, her hands hovering over the keys. "I have a confession to make," Paul said. His voice wasn't amplified by the sound system, but in the acoustic silence of the sanctuary, it carried to the back row. It was a naked voice. For 35 years, Paul began, looking into the eyes of Mrs. Higgins in the front row, "I have been lying to you." The congregation gasped. A deacon froze from his seat. "I didn't mean to lie," Paul continued, his voice steady. "I told you what I was taught. I told you that you were broken. I told you that you were sinners in the hands of an angry God. I told you to wait for Jesus to come back and fix this mess." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "I was wrong. I told you to look at the sky," Paul said, gesturing to the stained glass ceiling. "But I should have told you to look in the mirror. I told you to fear the judgment, but I should have told you to trust the love." He walked down the center aisle, making eye contact with the people he had shepherded for decades. He saw their tiredness. He saw the heavy burdens of guilt they carried, burdens he had helped strap onto their backs. "Jesus is not coming back on a cloud to save us from our credit card debt," Paul said softly. "He is not coming back to punish your enemies. He is already here." He stopped next to a young man named David, a mechanic who struggled with addiction and always sat with his head down in shame. Paul put a hand on David's shoulder. "He is right here," Paul whispered. "In David, in the struggle, in the hope." He turned to face the whole room. "We have been waiting for a king to conquer the world, but the king is waiting for us to conquer our own fear. We have been begging for miracles, but we forgot that we are the miracle." "I am done preaching fear," Paul declared, his voice rising with a new, resonant power that seemed to vibrate the very air of the room. "I am done telling you that you are unworthy. From this day forward, this church is not a waiting room for heaven. It is a training ground for earth. We are going to learn how to heal. We are going to learn how to forgive. We are going to learn how to tune our frequency to the station of love. And we are going to do it not because we are afraid of hell, but because we are the children of light, and it is time we started acting like it." The silence that followed was absolute, but it wasn't the dead silence of the tomb. It was the charged silence of a fuse being lit. Then something happened. Jennifer, a woman in the choir who had been battling chronic autoimmune pain for years, stood up. She wasn't looking at Paul. She was looking at the space around her with wide, wet eyes. "I feel it," she whispered. "I don't know what it is. But the pain, the HEAVINESS ... it's gone. I feel ... warm." It wasn't a theatrical faith healing. Paul hadn't touched her. He hadn't shouted, "Be healed." It was Paul was vibrating at the frequency of absolute truth and love, and that vibration was so strong that it was pulling the room up with him. The static was clearing. The connection was being established. Others began to weep not tears of guilt, but tears of relief, tears of homecoming. It was the feeling of taking off a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike. Paul looked at his congregation. He didn't see sinners anymore. He saw sleeping gods rubbing their eyes. He didn't preach a sermon that day. He didn't take an offering. Instead, he led them in a breathing exercise. He taught them how to quiet the noise. He taught them how to find the kingdom within. For the next hour, Grace Community Church didn't look like a Baptist service. It looked like a collective meditation. It looked like a field of flowers turning toward the sun. When the service ended, nobody rushed to the parking lot. They stayed. They talked. They looked at each other with a new softness. The separation was dissolving. Paul stood at the back door, shaking hands. But this time, he didn't give them platitudes. He gave them presence. You have the power, he told David, the mechanic. You don't need the bottle. You have the frequency. David looked at Paul, and for the first time, he didn't look ashamed. He looked curious as Paul walked to his truck that afternoon. He stopped at the spot where he had met the alien. The puddle was gone. The parking lot was dry, but the shift was permanent. He looked up at the sky. It was a clear, blue November day. I get it now, Paul said to the invisible observer. You didn't come to start a new religion. You came to end religion and start a relationship. He got in his truck. He had work to do. He had a whole new gospel to write, not the gospel of the waiting, but the gospel of the awakening. The story of Pastor Paul Mitchell is not just a parable about a man in a parking lot. It is a mirror held up to the entire human race. For 2,000 years, we have played the game of waiting for Godot. We have built magnificent cathedrals to house our waiting. We have written millions of books arguing about the timeline of the return. We have started wars over whose version of the waiting is correct. And all the while, the Spirit has been screaming in the silence, trying to tell us the one thing we refuse to hear. The bus is not coming, because you are already driving the car. The alien, the observer from the stars, did not come to give Paul a new religion. It came to dismantle the biggest lie in human history, the lie of separation. You watching this video right now, why did you click on it? Was it the alien? Or was it the deep, gnawing suspicion that the religion you were taught is incomplete? You feel it, don't you? You feel the gap between the promise of peace and the reality of your anxiety. You feel the exhaustion of trying to be good enough for a distant God. The truth revealed to Paul is the key to your cage. The second coming is not a breaking news event on CNN. It is not a man descending on a cloud to fix your politics, pay your debts, and punish your enemies. That is a child's fantasy of a superhero. The second coming is a frequency shift. It is the moment you stop looking for salvation outside of yourself and realize that the kingdom of heaven is a broadcast signal that is already playing inside your DNA. Is the moment you stop begging the universe for scraps and start realizing you are sitting at the head of the table when you forgive the unforgivable. Christ returns when you choose love over fear in the middle of a crisis. Christ returns when you look at a stranger and see not an enemy, but another version of yourself. Christ returns. He is not coming to you. He is coming through you. This is the hard part. This is the part where most people turn back to the comfort of the pew. Because if Jesus is already here, inside you, then you have no excuses left. You cannot blame the devil for your unhappiness. You cannot blame God for your poverty. You cannot blame the world for your anger. You are the generator of your own frequency. You are the architect of your own heaven or your own hell, right here, right now. This is terrifying responsibility, but it is also ultimate freedom. Paul Mitchell found that freedom. He stopped being a beggar in a robe and became a master in a suit. He stopped waiting for the afterlife and started building a life. He realized that God is not a destination you reach when you die. God is a relationship you cultivate while you breathe. So, I leave you with a challenge. Do not just watch this video and go back to sleep. Do not treat this as just another interesting theory. Test it. Be a scientist of your own soul. For the next 24 hours, try the frequency experiment. Every time you feel fear, stop and say, I switch to the frequency of trust. Every time you feel anger, stop and say, I switch to the frequency of understanding. Every time you feel lack, stop and say, I switch to the frequency of gratitude. See what happens to your reality. See if the miracles start to happen. See if the peace that surpasses understanding suddenly floods your chest. You don't need a priest to do this. You don't need a church building. You just need your own heart and your own choice. If you are ready to stop waiting and start becoming, if you are ready to be part of the critical mass that shifts this planet out of the dark ages, then join us. We are building a community of the awakened. We are not a religion. We are a network of lights turning on in the dark. Subscribe to this channel, not to worship us, but to remind yourself of who you really are. And I want you to make a declaration to the universe, to the observer, and to yourself. Go to the comments right now and write, I am the awakening. Let the algorithm know that the sleeper cells are active. Let the world know that the second coming has begun. In you, I am the narrator. The wait is over. The work begins. Welcome to the kingdom.